Today's reading from the Torah. Today we're looking at Numbers chapter 30 and 31. This is what it says. Moses told the leaders of the tribes concerning the Israelites, "This is what the Lord has commanded. If a man makes a vow to the Lord or takes an oath of binding obligation on himself, he must not break his word, but must do whatever he has promised. If a young woman who is still living in her father's house makes a vow to the Lord and places herself under obligation, and her father hears her vow or obligation to which she has pledged herself, and her father remains silent about it, then all her vows will stand, and every obligation to which she has pledged herself will stand. But if her father overrules her when he hears about it, then none of her vows or obligation to which she has pledged for herself will stand, and the Lord will release her from it, because her father overruled her. If she marries a husband while under a vow, where she uttered anything impulsive by which she has pledged herself, and her husband hears about it but remains silent about it when he hears about it, then her vow will stand, and her obligations which she has pledged for herself will stand. But if her husband hears it, he overrules her. But when her husband overhears it, he overrules her, then he will nullify the vow she has taken, and whatever she has uttered impulsively, which she has pledged herself for herself, and the Lord will release her from it. But every vow of a widow of a divorced woman, which she has pledged for herself, will remain intact. If she has made a vow in her husband's house, or put herself under the obligation of an oath, and her husband heard about it, but remained silent about her, and did not overrule her, then all her vows will stand, and every obligation which she has pledged for herself will stand. But if her husband clearly nullifies them when he hears them, then whatever she says by way of vow or obligation will not stand. Her husband has made them void, and the Lord will release her from them. Any vow or sworn obligation that would bring affliction to her husband can confirm or nullify. But if her husband remains completely silent about her from day to day, he thus confirms all of her vows or all her obligations which she is under. He confirms them because he remained silent about when he heard them. But if he should nullify them after he had heard them, then he will bear her iniquity. These are the statutes that the Lord commands Moses relating to a man and his wife, and a father and his young daughter still living in his father's house. The Lord spoke to Moses, exact vengeance for the Israelites on the Midianites. After that you will be gathered to your people. So Moses spoke to the people, arm men from among you for the war to attack the Midianites and to execute the Lord's vengeance on Midian. You must send them to the battle. You must send to the battle 1,000 men from every tribe throughout all the tribes of Israel. So 1,000 from every tribe, 12,000 armed for battle in all, were provided out of the thousands of Israel. So Moses sent them to war, 1,000 from every tribe, with Phinehas son of Eleazar the priest, who was in charge of the holy articles and the signal trumpets. They fought against the Midianites as the Lord commanded Moses, and they killed every male. They killed the kings of the Midian, in addition to those slain: Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, Reba, 5 Midianite kings. They also killed Balaam of Beor with the sword. The Israelites took the women of Midian captives along with their little ones, and took all their herds and all their flocks and all their goods as plunder. They burned all their towns where they lived and their encampments. They took all the plunder and all the spoils, both people and animals. And they brought the captives and the spoils and the plunder to Moses, to Eleazar the priest, to the Israelite community, to the camp of the plains of Moab, along the Jordan River, across from Jericho. Moses, Eleazar the priest, and all the leaders of the community went out to meet them outside the camp. But Moses was furious with the officers, the commanders over thousands, the commanders over 100 who had come from service in war. Moses said, "Have you allowed all the women to live? Look, these people, through the counsel of Balaam, caused the Israelites to act treacherously against the Lord in the matter of Peor, which resulted in the plague among the community of the Lord. Now therefore kill every boy and kill every woman who has had sexual intercourse with a man, but all the young women who have not had sexual intercourse with a man will be yours." Any of you who has killed or touched any of the dead remain outside the camp for 7 days. Purify yourself, your captives. And on the third day, and on the seventh day, you must purify each garment, and everything that is made of skin, everything made of goat's hair, and everything made of wood. Then Eleazar the priest said to the men of war who had gone into the battle, "This is the ordinance of the law of the Lord that the Lord commanded Moses. Only the gold and the silver and the bronze and the iron and the tin and the lead, everything that may stand the fire, you are to pass through the fire, and it will be ceremoniously clean, but it must still be purified with the water of purification. Anything that cannot stand the fire, you must pass through the water, and you must pass your clothes. You must wash your clothes on the seventh day, and you will be ceremonially clean, and afterwards you may enter the camp." Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "You and Eleazar the priest and all the family leaders of the community take the sum of the plunder that was captured, both the people and the animals. Divide the plunder into two parts, one for those who took part and one who went out into battle, and the other for all the community. You must exact tribute for the Lord from the fighting men who went out to battle, one out of 500 from the people. The cattle from the donkeys and the sheep you're to take from it their half share, and give Eleazar the priest for a raised offering to the Lord. From from the Israelites' half share you're to take one portion out of 50 of the people, and the cattle and the donkey and the sheep from every kind of animal you are to give to the Levites who are responsible for the care of the Lord's tabernacle. So Moses and Eleazar the priest did as the Lord commanded Moses, that the spoil that remained of the plunder which the fighting men had gathered was 600,075 sheep, 72,000 cattle, 61,000 donkeys, and 32,000 young women who had never had sexual intercourse with a man. The half portion of those who went to war numbered 37,500 sheep. The Lord's tribute was 675. The cattle numbered 36,000. The Lord's tribute was 72. The donkeys were 30,500, of which the Lord's tribute was 61. The people, the people were 16,000, of which the Lord's tribute was 32. So Moses gave the tribute, which was the Lord's raised offering, to Eleazar the priest, as the Lord commanded. From the Israelites' half share that Moses separated from the fighting men, there were 337,500 sheep. From the portion belonging to the community, 36,000 cattle, 30,500 donkeys, and 16,000 people. From the Israelites' share, Moses took one of every 50 people and animals, and gave them to the Levites, who were responsible for the care of the Lord's tabernacle, just as the Lord commanded Moses. The officers who were over the thousands of the army, the commanders over the thousands, and the commanders over the hundreds, approached Moses and said to him, "Your servants have taken account of the men who were in battle and who were under our authority, and not one is missing. So we brought an offering for the Lord, what each man found: gold ornaments, bracelets or armlets, signet rings, earrings, necklaces, to make atonement for ourselves before the Lord." Moses and Eleazar the priest took the gold from them, all of it in the form of ornaments. All the gold offerings they offered up to the Lord from the commanders of the thousands and the commanders of the hundred weighed 16,750 shekels. Each soldier had taken plunder from himself. So Moses and Eleazar the priest received the gold from the commanders of the thousands and the commanders of the hundreds, and brought it into the tent of meeting as a memorial for the Israelites before the Lord. Now, as we look at things like this, there are some questions, and in the first chapter we read about vows, and it's easy to read that and say, well, why did they have to keep their vows? But if a father of a young daughter heard about a vow and said, no, you're not going to do that, they didn't have to keep that. Well, part of the thing is, in that culture, women really didn't get to make vows. Women weren't viewed as even responsible enough to make vows. So the fact that there are vows that are made, and that they make stipulations that a husband just can't all of a sudden decide that this vow his wife made, or a father that this vow his daughter made, all of a sudden after hearing about it a long time ago decide, oh, that's a stupid vow, you can't do that. Really, this is about the value of vows and their seriousness. And so it was a thing where this actually gave women a little more right than they would have had if they were in their neighboring culture. And that's something that we don't understand because we live in a Western culture and we see the way we do things. But the way that their neighbors would have done things would have been very different. Women would not have had any rights, and they would not have had the right to make vows and keep them. And so that's actually something that God has actually given women more right and um, more autonomy. The fact that they can make a vow, and if their father or their husband don't nullify it as soon as they hear about it, that vow stands. That's an important thing in that culture. And vows in that culture were very serious. When you made a vow, you were expected to keep it. I think of Japheth's rash vow that he made in the book of Judges. This was again a time when people did whatever they wanted, and there was no king in Israel. That's the refrain of Judges, that they really didn't listen to God. Even the ones who were judges didn't always do the best. I mean, if you look at the judge Samson, he's not really a godly person. If you look at his behavior and what he did, God used him to do some amazing things, but his downfall was his ungodly behavior. But Japheth made a vow, and he vowed, well, God, if if you give us victory, and it calls it a rash vow. If you give us victory, he didn't ask God if he needed to make a vow. He just said, if you give us victory, I vow that I will kill the first thing that I meet when I come home. He was thinking, well, I'll meet one of my animals, because in that day and time period, there you had a two-story home. The bottom story was where the animals would stay, and you'd have some storage. And this top story is where people would stay. So more than likely, the first thing that he would see when he came to his house would be an animal coming out. So he made a vow. The first animal he saw was a human, was his daughter. And he fulfilled that vow. And we say, that's awful. And the scripture says not to do that. Yeah, it does. It says, in fact, that's one of the reasons that the things that the Midianites did that were seen as abomination to God. They would sacrifice children to their gods. So, but these vows, they were important, and so you had to be careful about the vows you make. And I think that's something that we sometimes don't think about, especially when we look at our world that doesn't really make a big deal about when people make promises and don't keep them. When people say something that are a lie. That's something to think about. And how do we speak? And are we careful with our words? Are we careful in what we promise that we will do? Those are things to think about. The next chapter we have the war against the Midianites. So what did the Midianites do that was so bad? Well, because Moses' wife was a Midianite, Zipporah, Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, was a Midianite, and he was a Midianite that he seemed to worship the one true God. So what happened? Well, the Midianites, under the influence of Balaam of Beor, the women seduced the men and brought them, the people of Israel, the men of Israel, to worship other gods. And this caused this great plague among the people of Israel. And so this is part of this idea is God's creating his people, but his people have to worship him and not fall into the same trap that the people of Canaan already have fallen into, as they are worshiping other spiritual beings that are not God, and that are actually opposed to God. They are not gods, but they are not equal to God. But God has let them kind of have authority over those people, and those people just worship them. And they some of them, they do worship the one true God, but many of them don't. Many of them have turned aside and worship these false gods. And so, but the people of Israel, they can't do that. God is preparing his people, and he's preparing his people for Jesus to come ultimately. And so this idea that he tells them to wipe out the Midianites, we look at that like, oh, that's terrible. But we don't necessarily see the whole picture. We may look at that and oh, that shouldn't have happened. That's how is God loving in that? And what we don't understand is we don't understand what their future would have been. We don't understand how that would have affected the Israelites. We don't understand maybe that the people that were killed, their life would have continued to degrade and get less and less, and maybe some of them would have ended up being sacrificed and tortured for these false gods. We do know that God is good. Sometimes it's hard to look at it and say, well, by my standard, this looks weird. But guess what? Our standards are very flawed. Our standards are very us-centric, and we don't see the whole picture. We don't know what might have happened. And so what we do know is God had a purpose. And in order to fill that purpose, God had to keep his people Israel together and do his best to keep them on track as they came into this holy land, as they came into this promised land, and they would be a tribe, a people of these different tribes, and out of that people would come his son. All of this is for preparation for that. And we have to keep that in perspective. And ultimately, Jesus came so that all humanity could be forgiven, could come to know him, and spend eternity with him. We need to remember that as we look at these things and have some perspective there. Anyway, hope you guys are doing